would like to introduce Myra Jolivet, who will be interviewing Anne DeVigo. Myra created Emmy Award-winning special reports and told stories of true crime during her years in television news. She has frequently appeared on true crime shows. But her love of traditional mysteries motivated her to write the Sarah Doucette John Louis series. And let me know if I got that wrong.
It's Jean-Louis. You got it. It's Jean-Louis.
Oh, there we go. Like Myra, Sarah is a San Francisco Bay Area native with mystical Louisiana Creole roots. She leans into Louisiana spiritualism to help her solve crimes. Sarah's story is in the UC Berkeley Bancroft Library. Welcome, Myra, who will introduce Anne DeVigo.
Well, hello, everybody, and I hope everyone's getting comfortable and ready for this amazing talk that we're going to have. This visit will be wonderful. You will enjoy it. Let me tell you about Anne first. Before we get to Anne's story, let's hear Anne's story. And Anne is an author of psychological thrillers and a longtime California journalist. She worked as a police reporter and feature writer when not a lot of women were police reporters. So we definitely want to talk about that. And check this out. At one point, she nearly went to jail, refusing to disclose her source in a murder for hire investigation. So her fiction short stories have been published in literary magazines and read on NPR's San Joaquin Valley affiliate. And she won a Jameson Award for a thriller that was set in San Joaquin Valley. When she's not writing, Anne is a tap dance performer, and her word here, unskilled but enthusiastic gardener. So without waiting, let's dive in and get to know Anne DeVigo. Anne, thank you so much. It's wonderful to visit with you again because we met a couple weeks ago.
Thanks, Myra. It really is fun, and being able to talk books and talk reading with people is always a fun thing to do. I think there's nothing better than a reader or a writer. They are interesting to talk to, and it's always a lot of fun.
It totally is. And I enjoyed your book. But before we get to that, I have to ask you, what was it like being a woman police reporter at a time when there weren't many, if any? I mean, right. So what was that like? Tell us a little bit.
There certainly were not very many women police officers, and in some cases where I covered police in the San Joaquin Valley, that there were no police women, and even at that time, there weren't necessarily that many women reporters. I know when I went to Bakersfield and worked at the Bakersfield Californian, I was only the second general assignment woman sent a general assignment reporter that they'd hired since World War II. So there weren't that many women in many of the journalism beats, including the crime beat and the court beat. So it was challenging. I wouldn't say that there were no women on those beats, because in those small valley newspapers that didn't pay much, women were, among the most, there are a lot of women working in those small papers, as some of you gals who are listening today probably do remember.
Well, I had to wonder, is that why you chose to write fiction about actual events? Was it that exposure, or did you make that decision before those jobs?
I think I was always interested in doing fiction. I wrote a women's fiction book back in the 90s that I got an agent for but wasn't able to sell, and started on a couple of other books while I was still working at the legislature and also on the crime beat. But I just felt like I would have more freedom if I wrote fiction rather than writing true crime. Like there are people right here in our own Sisters in Crime chapter that, have written true crime. But somehow I just felt that there might be a little bit more freedom, but there certainly were a lot of opportunities and a lot of wonderful stories to tell, and strange and unusual stories to tell out of working the crime beat. And not all of them were murders. I wrote a story once about neighborhood disputes and how bitter a neighborhood dispute can be. So those stories were all interesting stories, but I just felt like I would have more freedom if I wrote fiction.
Well, I told you when we met, it freaked me out that you use real names, real people,
Mhm.
because, I guess it shows where I've been hanging out. My first thing was, oh, lawsuit. I was really paranoid about that. But tell us why that works.
Well, like when I wrote this book, Night Flight, and also when I wrote Bakersfield Boys Club, and I researched it quite a bit. And coming from my journalism school, I knew that you can't libel dead people. And so if they're dead, as all of you probably know, if you read books, at all, I think there have been at least, 5 dozen books and quite a few fiction books about Abraham Lincoln. And they just
Right.
wrote anything they wanted to, and the crazy stuff about Abraham Lincoln. So if the person is dead, you can write about them and you aren't subject to libel. However, I felt, and in both the Bakersfield book and in Night Flight, I felt that there are people that are still alive now surrounding those incidents. And so I was fairly careful. For example, in Night Flight, the wife of John Gilbert Graham, who was the bomber in this in this terrible incident, I just felt that John Gilbert Graham's children were still one of his children at least was still alive, and it would be really hurtful to have John Gilbert's wife's real name in the story, and so I didn't. On the other hand, there are several books written with quite a bit of depth about the bombing of mainliner 629, which is the underlying incident of Night Flight. And I felt that these books that were written were written about people, real people, and they were written extensively about. And so I thought in those cases that it would be all right to go ahead. For example, the minister of the church where I went, and where John Gilbert Graham and his family also went back in those 1950 years, Reverend Kellums, that I wrote about. I used his real name because he had been extensively written about. So in those cases, I did use a real name. I didn't say, and of course, I was writing something very positive about Reverend Kellums. So in those cases, I did use a real name. And there were public figures in those cases that I used their real names.
And that's one thing that, in addition to writing about real people,
Mhm.
these are real people you had possibly a 2-degree or closer connection with, like the neighbor who was, one of the witnesses, and the killer himself who went to your church. Before that, though, let me read for everybody just a tiny bit about the book, and then we'll have you read, and then we'll
Okay.
talk about, your thought process and everything, and a little more about the story without giving too much away. So the book is Night Flight, as Anne said. And it's set in 1955 Denver, Colorado. Hannah Brightman is a lonely 17-year-old, and she's mourning the death of her mom. At the same time, her father has remarried, and he and the new wife have twins. And obviously, she feels left out. Her older brothers are away, living their lives. So one frigid winter night at a skating party, she meets a handsome but married man, Jack. So, you know, she's flattered by the attention. She also has something where she's disfigured, right? And she has like a mole or something that disfigures her face. So that adds to her lack of confidence. So when this older guy, good looking guy, showers her with attention and tells her how he's attracted to her, you know, they begin an affair. But she starts to realize that he's dangerous. And there's just something, every scene with him, you just feel that chill of danger, like it's right around the corner. He's violent and he has deep, long held grievances. He's very layered. There are many things happening inside of him. So the clock is ticking as Hannah struggles to break off the relationship. But Jack lures her in further into this vortex that he has of greed and revenge. So, can she get herself out of this before he launches his plan? That's what you have to read Night Flight to figure out. But this is about greed and complicated families, complicated people, complicated circumstances. So, and is there a favorite paragraph that you want to read for everyone? From
No,
your,
it's a little teeny bit more than a paragraph, but I will read it to you.
that's fine.
And it touches on something that you mentioned in your summary. Hannah's gone skating at night and she sees three men get into a car in the parking lot there at the lake. And there are two cars there. One car leaves, the other man gets out of the car. The caddy churned snow from its back tires as it pulled out, then sped away. The remaining man strode toward his Buick. Glancing up, he stared at her. "Are you spying on me?" He edged closer. "I know you. You're the girl with the birthmark who goes to Woodlake Methodist." What a mean thing to say. Tonight, confident on her skates, Hannah had almost forgotten about the irregular red patch in the middle of her left cheek. "Don't you have any manners?" "It's just the truth." He didn't seem embarrassed. The wind rose, and the force of cold air against her face was oddly cleansing. Most people didn't acknowledge the disfigurement. Only her grandmother, who used to call it Hannah's rose. To the rest of her family, the birthmark was the great unnamed, like farts or bad breath, but inescapable. People had two reactions, either gluing their eyes on it in fascination or looking past her as if she were a tree or a rock. Up close, the man appeared to be younger than she first thought, in his mid-20s. He fidgeted with nervous energy like a boy, his eyes darting toward her, then veering away, hands rubbing together, weight shifting from foot to foot. "I'm Jack Graham," he said.
Hmm.
So
You
that,
know, Jack really got me. I hated Jack. I wanted to hate Jack. Then I felt sorry for Jack. Then I hated Jack again. I mean, I was on the roller coaster this whole ride. I just have to be honest. So, okay, there's all these layers of Jack. Jack was a real person. Jack was dangerous and a bomber. What can you tell us about Jack? What makes him make sense?
well, in crafting the story, I found that I didn't want him to be just completely full of evil. Like some evil genie or something. I want him to be a human person. And but he was a terrible person. 44 people died on mainliner 529 that crashed about 11 minutes out of the airport in Denver back in 1955. Jack put dynamite in his mother's suitcase, and it blew up and blew the plane and 44 people died on that plane. So he was a terrible, terrible person. But on the other hand, I didn't want to make him like, a subhuman person. He'd had a very, very difficult life. His mother was widowed early in Jack's life, and she put him in an orphanage. He had an older half sister that went into a nice girls' school during this time. And when his mother remarried, she took the daughter back, but she never retrieved Jack from the orphanage, and he spent many years there.
And I was surprised to learn that that part was true.
It
You know,
was,
I
yes.
I thought that maybe that was, part that was fiction just to add some heft to the story, but his mother was a beast.
Yeah, she was a terrible person, I think, in a lot of ways. And even in one of the accounts I read, even her daughter, that's Jack's half sister, didn't have much good to say about her. That she was a very hard and mean person. Um, and Jack, during those years when he was in the orphanage, I think that orphanage was a very bad place. In my research, I found a report from the Child Welfare Association of America from about 10 years after Jack was there. And the place, with 5 large stone buildings, was built for about 300 young boys. And at the time Jack was there, I think there were only about 40 or 50 kids there. So you can imagine that these 40 or 50 boys were rattling around in very, very large buildings that I can't imagine were heated during the winter time very much. So it must have been lonely. I think he was often put upon by the older boys.
Yeah.
And he ran away numerous times. That was documented. So I tried to make, while he was a terrible person, I tried to make him with human qualities as well.
And so Hannah was a fictional character. Is she there to advance the story? Did you pull her together to help,
Well,
reveal Jack?
yes, I did. And I wanted there to be some redeeming persons in the story. And at the time that this happened, I was in the 7th grade. I didn't pay much attention to the crash itself. I think I was more interested in having crushes on older boys. I was just, I was a 13-year-old. And so I didn't pay much attention, but I thought as I was working on this story that I wanted someone or a group of people that were affected by this, and that I could write about freely and write about their emotions freely. And I could do that if I had some fictional characters. And I'll tell you how I kind of got the idea for having Hannah and her family in this story. Several years ago, I read a book called The Dakota Winters. And the Dakota Winters was not about the state of Dakota and its winters. It was about the Dakota, which was the very famous apartment building in New York City where John Lennon lived. And the author of this book, Tom Barbage, wrote about a family living in the Dakota alongside of John Lennon and building up to the time when John Lennon was murdered. And I could see how he worked that story, bringing in a lot of details about the way New York City was at that time, the whole kind of that whole milieu of people. And so I thought I could do that with this story. And
Right.
so that's what I did. I created a family that had its own problems. It was working on its own stuff. Hannah is working on overcoming a whole lot of things. You know, her own disfigurement, the breakup of her family, and the death of her mother. And in working on this and working also with John Gilbert Graham, I felt that I was kind of working with two things: a real family that was working on problems, and Jack Graham, who was falling into this terrible abyss from which he wasn't able to save himself.
So for people who, before they read the book, tell us again, who were the people that you knew or you knew of in
Well,
Denver?
Well, Jack Graham and his family went to my church. I think his in-laws were very active in the church.
Yeah.
And about that time, he and his family went there, and my family also went there, although I don't recall ever meeting them. I don't know if they went to the same service we did, but the pastor of that church, Reverend Kellums, was a really nice man. He was kind of a big, jolly guy, red-faced guy, and he was just a super, super nice man. And he was the man who baptized me about 4 years before all this happened. I can still remember, that afterward, that there's a little drops of water coming off my head where he put his hand on my head. After Jack Graham was arrested, Reverend Kellums was very active in counseling Jack's wife, and also Jack as he sat in prison awaiting execution. And so the kind of the juxtaposition of my minister being at kind of these two things, me and this other person, I could, I carried that around for quite a long time. The other interesting thing about Jack's connection to our church was that on the day that the FBI really started to investigate him, he and his wife left church and went downtown to the FBI office in Denver. Jack was interviewed there for many hours, and they arrested him right there on the spot, and he went to prison. He was never free again after he left church. So all those things kind of like worked with me as I worked on the story. And I researched each of those fairly carefully. And as you mentioned, in the process of doing the research on the book, I happened to read an account in which the author had included several photographs that were taken at the trial. The trial was a very interesting trial because it was the first time that television and photographers were allowed in a courtroom here in the United States. It was quite an interesting trial in that regard. But anyway, they took pictures at the trial, and the author included those pictures in his book. One of the pictures was the picture of a woman being interviewed, being a witness at this trial. She's sitting up there right beside the judge, and the caption said that this was Annie Marie Teal. And I thought, oh, it can't be. It can't be, because the woman that lived next door to us was Annie Marie Teal. And I went to the history section of the Denver Library, and I said, can you help me? This can't be the same person. So they went and looked up the census records, and it was indeed the same one. And I don't think my parents knew anything about that Annie Marie. She was the one that sold the timer to Jack Graham that he attached to the dynamite that he put in his mother's suitcase that blew up the plane. And he told Annie Marie a lie about why he was buying that timer. He said it was for a construction project or something. So even at the trial, according to the book I read, she was so upset at what had happened that she couldn't even say his name out loud, saying, "This is the person." She had to point to him, and the judge said, let it be recorded by the court reporter that she pointed at him.
Well, you know, the amazing tension, one aspect of the wonderful tension that keeps the reader going through it is that feeling that he's going to somehow have Hannah implicated as well. Was that your
And I
intention?
tried to draw her in as well as I could, and I'll leave that to the reader to find that out. But
Uh,
of course, Hannah tries, she tries to extricate herself, but she's only 17 and she doesn't have perhaps as much savvy as someone as an older person might. And she's a lonely person. It's how she
Yeah.
got involved with him in the first place before she knew what he was up to. So,
Totally.
but if the reader wants to find out what happens to her and how
Yes.
that all turns out, well, they can buy the book if they like, and they can get it at Amazon, or they can order it from their bookstore. But it was a very, very interesting book to write. And as one of the things that happened as a result of the explosion, it was that the debris from the airplane was spread over a wide area. The explosion happened over a vacant sugar beet field about 40 miles north of Denver. So the debris was found by people like 15 miles away. It was such a horrendous explosion. But people found them, pieces in their backyard and like that, and they turned it over to the people that were reconstructing the plane.
Just devastating for the community. Another surprise was the fact that you wove in a former president into into your story.
Well, yeah, and also, well, I just thought it was very interesting. And that was one of the things that Tom Barbash did in his book about the Dakota Winters, was he was weaving in what New York City was like during that time. Teddy Kennedy was running for president and that sort of thing. So one of the things that did actually happen during the time when they were investigating this crash, this airplane explosion, and arresting Jack Graham, was that President Eisenhower was in the hospital there in Denver. He was in the Veterans Hospital there, which had, the best military doctors in the world, because President Eisenhower had had a heart attack there while he was playing golf in Denver. He and his wife, for many years, kind of felt like that Denver was their home, because they were moved all around while Eisenhower was still in the Army. And so he was in the hospital there in Denver. And he would come out on the balcony, every day and wave, kind of say, "Oh, I'm getting better," because he had to run for president the next year. And so he wanted to let everyone know that he was in good shape. And so I tried to weave that into the story because it was part of the fabric of what was going in Denver during those years and during that particular time.
Exactly.
The other thing that I included in the book that was really happening during that time was that there was a mafia family that controlled almost all of the criminal enterprises in Denver, and all those enterprises, some of which are now legal. There was betting, and and there were drugs. They were doing, they had control of the drug market pretty much. The Smaldone family.
And was it a restaurant? Did they really own a restaurant? Or
They really did own a restaurant, and that restaurant is still there, although the family doesn't own it anymore. But I do have a scene where Hannah and Jack go to that restaurant, and that Smaldone family is kind of woven into the story as well, because they really were woven into the fabric of Denver in those years. And two of the members of the Smaldone family were convicted of income tax evasion and sent to prison about 6 weeks before all of the incident happened as far as the airplane. So that was all kind of like right in the mix of what was happening in Denver during those years. And
Wow.
and I do have a scene where Hannah and Jack go to the restaurant that at that time was owned by the Smaldone family. Yeah.
And that's their real name, Smaldone?
Yeah, isn't that a funny name?
It
Smaldone.
is. I thought that was a fake name. I
No,
just
no, it's the
I
real
thought it had
thing.
some sort of yeah,
It's the real thing.
that was
Yeah.
very unusual. So, I'm always fascinated by process. And, before we get to, other questions, I wanted to kind of pick your brain on what is your process and what are some lessons learned, just things about how you write and what are things you've learned during your writing career?
Well, I'd had this idea kind of a little bit for a while, and I'd had another book that was in first draft. And when I got the idea for this story, I set aside that book, and I'll eventually go back to it. So I just started out writing, and I'm not one of those people that knows exactly what's going to happen at the end. Although, of course, I did know what would happen, how it happened to Jack, but I really didn't know what was going to happen to Hannah in this book. And so what I do is I just start writing. I know there are people that like to plot out each little stair step of what happens in the plot, but I'm not one of those people. I just start writing, and it just comes. I have ideas about what Hannah might do or might not do, and I do write with a pen or a pencil in a notebook, and I'll write, almost every day. But I just start out with a new chapter or something, and I just start writing, and things just come.
So wait, you're writing longhand?
Yeah, I do. And then I put it into the computer. Once I've
Wow.
got a chapter that's in fairly good shape, I'll put it into the computer, and I add things, as I'm going on the keyboard with the computer. But I find that using a pencil or a pen, there's that connection between your fingers and your brain that somehow gets things going. Your body's working on it as well as your head. And somehow, for me, that works. I'm a longtime member of a writers group that I started back in the 90s. And one of the things we do is write from prompts, every, once a week. And I do notice that I get a lot of ideas, in that, just writing for 20 minutes from a prompt. It gets things moving for me. I'm not just sitting there at the computer with my hands, on the keyboard, wondering where I'm going next. Because with pencil and pen, you're moving along, and things just seem to flow, at least for me. Not for everybody, probably, but it does for me.
Well, your writing group, that has to be a record somewhere. That's been around for how many years now? And tell us,
30 years. Yeah,
how did
been
it
around for
start?
30 years. Yeah, and we meet almost every Monday night. Um, During Zoom, we started meeting on Zoom on Monday nights. But there's nothing like getting together with those women. They're almost all women. We've got one guy right now. And in the past, we've had a few other guys, but it's mostly women. And they're an amazing group, and we are there for each other about our writing. I have a stack of books about this high that we've written over the years, that various members have written over the years. But I think that process of just sitting down and writing for 20 minutes, just longhand, is
Mhm.
is a is a way of opening up uh, your brain, your creativity. I don't know what that is, but it does seem to work.
Well, you gave me a tip that really has helped me because with my new series, I keep rotating who the murderer is. I never I can't stick to one. But your what ifs, tell people about the what ifs. I love that.
Well, when I get stuck, um, and everybody gets stuck sometimes on what's going to be next. And so sometimes I'll just sit down, and I'm stuck. I'll just do like 10 what ifs. What if the character did this? What if they did that? What if this happened? What if that happened? And almost always when if I write down 4 or 5 or maybe even 10 things, one of them I know is the one. it just gets your brain moving, and you get like, okay, I mean, you're just working with that character. Okay, Hannah could have done this. She could do this. She could do that. She could this could happen. And somehow, as I'm doing that, those things just pop up. They come. Your brain is working on it, and they come. And that's one way. I can't say that I ever really suffer from writer's block. Sometimes, I'll write on that one for a while and then, shift a little bit. But almost always, that what came up, I can work with that and move on.
Well, it helped me because you create the scenarios for the what ifs, and that starts to, really melt into either a plot that you want or not, and you've thought it through. So it was amazing. It really is. So with that, I want to open up the floor and see if we have some other questions. I don't want to just have me asking. There are other people I'm sure want to.
Yeah, that'd be great. I love questions.
So, can we do that, Karen? Can we start letting people ask questions now?
Yes, everybody unmute yourselves and turn on your video. And Chris Drythe is going to read the questions in the chat, but of course we might have more after she reads those off.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hi, Anne. This
Hi.
has been fun. Okay, I've got a couple questions here. One was, I know you did a lot of research for this book and had help from the library in Denver. Did you go back to Denver to do this research? If so, how much time did you spend there?
I didn't. I went back to look at some of the sites, but the research, I just emailed them at the Denver Public Library's history section, and they were super nice. If I asked them, they found old photographs.
Oh, wow.
They found old documents. One of the really important documents I found was that report that I told you about a report detailing the orphanage where John Gilbert Graham spent a number of years, maybe a decade. And I had heard that there was such a report. And when I went to the Child Welfare Association of America, they said they didn't have it anymore because it was written, the report was written back in the early 60s. But I went to the Denver Public Library history section, and they said that there is a huge trove of documents, maybe millions of digitized documents in I guess it's a company called Ebasco. Anyway, and the libraries all around are connected to them, but the public can't go there. At least that's what they told me. The public is not, it's not open to the public. And so the Denver Library went to Ebasco and got a copy and found a copy of that report. And they downloaded it and sent it to me. And so that's the kind of thing that I found was very helpful. There are also some newspapers will allow you access to them, but there are a lot of papers that still will not allow access. But I went to the Denver Public Library and they had access to a lot of historical photos and stuff that weren't part of something that the public could access. And I thought that was really, really helpful as well. Because the Denver Post, I'm pretty sure, has nearly all of their documents locked down now, and in a proprietary way, and I can see why they might do that. But the library can find those documents for you and send them to you. So that also was a very, very helpful way of doing research. They were super nice, super nice.
Great.
They were over and above.
Yeah, and they found a couple of books. They referred me to a couple of books as well that they had in their collection.
Wow, perfect.
Yeah.
Another one is, I think it's clever to give Hannah birthmark on her face as a flaw. What gave you that idea?
I don't know. I can't tell you. It somehow it just came up. I knew I wanted her to be uh to be a, kind of an outcast at school and lonely. I wanted to be kind of a lonely person. And I thought, now what, what would there be about her that might make her a lonely person? And that somehow that just came up for me. And so that's how I did it. I can't tell
One
you
of those,
exactly how I got the idea.
one of those what ifs.
Yeah, maybe it was.
Did Jack plant the bomb in his mother's baggage to kill his mother, or was his goal to kill everyone?
This was, well, he never ever said during any of the court hearings or even up to the time he was executed, he seemed to have no sympathy for the other people on the plane that died. He put the dynamite in his mother's suitcase for the flight insurance money that he could get for her. And he had several earlier schemes that are well documented that I do have in the book in trying to get insurance money. He had and I don't know what his plan was. I invented a plan for him, but I don't know what it really was. But so and back, maybe some of you remember and some of you don't, but back in the 1950s, there used to be kiosks at the airports where you could buy flight insurance right there at the airport. And so that's what Jack did, is he bought that. And I think his plan was to forge his mother's signature on those documents. And he bought flight insurance for about $65,000 worth of flight insurance, which doesn't sound like much today, but in those days it would be the equivalent of about $500,000.
Wow.
And what his plan was to do with that, I'm not clear. But I invented a plan for him. So
when did you originally decide to write about this?
it was 2 summers ago or 3 summers ago. I was going up to BoucherCon up in Minneapolis, and I sent off my manuscript to a gal who is involved in putting together the Minneapolis BoucherCon, and she said, and she does it takes a look at them and does developmental edits. And she said, "Oh, I'm busy with BoucherCon, but I'll get back to you in a couple of months." And so while I was waiting for her to get back to me, I had the idea for this, and I just thought, I'm going for it. I just got really excited about it and said, I'm going for it. I can always come back to the other book. And
Did
so
you ever hear back from her?
oh yeah. She sent me the whole thing, and all of that stuff is still sitting in my computer.
Well,
I haven't looked at it for over 2 years.
Yeah, she took too long. You were
yeah.
Did you write your newspaper stories longhand when you were a reporter too?
No. I would get in there and I would just go wham, 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 da, 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 da. And I think maybe that's one reason why writing in a notebook is helpful. Because as you know, Jennifer, and some of you other people that have been newspaper reporters, you're there on deadline, and you're there at 3 o'clock after you've gone out, and talked to this or that person, and you get in there and you hammer out that story. And you're editing as you go. I mean, you're just like, okay, the editor wants this, before 5 o'clock. And so what you do is you're editing as you go. But that doesn't work very well, I don't think, for working on fiction, because you want to craft that, and you think, okay, now what is this person going to do, and that person, and oh, maybe I could just like put a little something in about this. That doesn't work for reporters that are at the keyboard, working on whatever it is that they've got to get into their editor who's pounding on his desk. So I think that's one reason why I like working longhand for a bit and then putting into the computer. And sometimes I do some edits on the computer as well.
Oh, we have a question. Are you in any critique groups now?
I was for a long time. I was in a critique group, but I'm not right now. I'm my Monday night group. We do prompts together, and we read back from those prompts and give ourselves positive feedback. But they're just 20-minute prompts, and you guys, it's amazing what you can write in 20 minutes. It's just some of the things that come out are just incredible. Those women, you just and I can see it myself. What happens out of just that 20 minutes? It just blossoms. It's just amazing. So anyway, but I don't try and edit there. I just work from that. But I'm not right now. I'm not in a critique group. I do think it helps a lot. I was in a critique group over in Davis for many, many years, and it really did help with people saying, this does not work right here. You need to do something about this. And that is very, very helpful, because if somebody's reading it and says, hey, this sucks, they wouldn't. I don't want to be in a group where people say this sucks, but if say, hey, you need more here. You need to, you need to expand on this, or what happens here? That's great. That's great feedback.
Yeah, it is.
June wants to know if Jack ever got the insurance money.
No, he was in jail long before any of that insurance money ever came out. Actually, he was arrested within a couple of weeks. I think, and this is just a supposition, but the FBI has always said that one of the reasons why they decided to take a look at Jack and look at him more closely was that his mother's purse was blown off the plane and someone found it. And inside his mother's purse was a yellowed newspaper clipping about a theft that Jack had done several years before. And that doesn't sound like, I don't believe that for a minute. I think that Jack's mother-in-law, who didn't like him at all, was the one that had that clipping, and she gave it to the FBI. That's what I've always thought after reading that. But anyway, he was involved in several other things, and my thought was that the FBI might have gotten onto Jack because of that newspaper clipping.
Wow, fascinating.
So I have another question. Are you working on something now that you could tell us a little bit about, or is it too soon?
Well, it's kind of a fun one. I'll just tell you a little bit about it. Several years ago, my husband is an attorney. He worked for the Attorney General's office for 40 years, and he graduated from Santa Clara. And they had a reunion back several years ago, and we were sitting around the table with his other classmates, and somebody said, whatever happened to Rick Allen? And that was one of their classmates. And one of the other people at the table said, oh, I think Rick Allen got disbarred. And somebody else said, no, I think Rick Allen moved to Las Vegas and the mafia killed him. And I thought, ooh, well, wouldn't that be a story? So this is what happened to Rick Allen. And I created a whole bunch of characters around that. And this is whatever happened to Rick Allen. And the title of it is Presumed Dead. He's presumed dead, but no, of course not. We're mystery writers. We know that he's not dead.
That's right. The moment you use that title, we knew, right?
Yeah. And the main character is a woman who was a woman who was in law school with him, and they were married briefly. And Rick turned out to be a very bad person, and she managed to escape from him, but he comes back to bother her and the daughter that he never knew he had.
Wow. Whatever happened to Rick Allen?
Yeah.
So cool. But I love how that came about too. That's just
well, and I went online on newspapers.com, and in about 4 hours I found out whatever happened to Rick Allen. And Rick Allen was a really, really bad guy. Yeah, he did all kinds of crimes, you know, all over the place, and went on for years after he graduated from law school.
So Anne, is Rick Allen dead so you can say whatever you want about him and use his name?
Yep, he died in 2008.
Rick Allen's fair game now, isn't it?
He is, yeah, yeah.
Wow.
But
Any
yeah,
other questions? Anybody else have a question or comment, something they want to say before we say goodnight?
well, it's just so great to see all you guys. You know, I see some people I haven't seen for a long, long time, which is just wonderful. My sister is here, which is terrific.
Oh, great.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's just wonderful to see everybody because I see some familiar faces and some brand new faces that it's a delight. So thank you.
Well, you're a delight. It has been wonderful meeting you and definitely reading Night Flight. Once again,
Thank
if you haven't read it, you want to read it because there's a lot more in here than what we talked about.
you. Yeah, yeah. Hannah gets herself in and out of a lot of situations
Yeah.
before she finally, well, I won't even say that.
No, don't.
Okay.
Don't tell.
All right. Good to see
Myra, thank you so much. Thank you,
Yeah.
Anne. Thank you,
Okay.
everybody.
Yeah, it was wonderful to see you, and thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. Karen, Rick, Myra.
Oh,
Good
it's been
night.
Good night.
good night. Bye, everyone.
Bye.